I'm wrapping up my top 10 fights for the 5 main characters of Dragon Ball Z with Krillin. The rules are the same as before. With each ranking, I'm going to explain why it earned its place, what I like about it, and what I don't like about it, as to illustrate the thought process behind placing certain fights ahead of others. Number 10. Krillin vs. Pintar. At the 25th World's Martial Arts Tournament, Krillin is matched against Pintar, a man twice his size who offers Krillin a free hit. Krillin defeats him with a single blow to the stomach, which he follows up with some slaps before removing him from the ring. For the last spot, it was a toss-up between this fight and some of Krillin's battles during Super, as he did not fight during GT. I ended up picking this one over those because, to me, it acted as a bookend of sorts. So, throughout Dragon Ball Z until the Buu Saga, there wasn't a martial arts tournament featured in the story. Having the series at the time end with an arc that featured a martial arts tournament and having Krillin defeat his opponent with one blow was probably the most impressive showing by any character during the tournament. It served as a bookend because he was one of the few characters who participated in every tournament held throughout the series, so it made sense for his character to shine during the last one. The reason this is at the bottom is entirely due to its length. I probably wouldn't have included it if it wasn't the last moment of focus that Krillin received in the original manga. And really it served to deceive me because I was under the impression that this fight would mean that Krillin at least could hold his own against larger opponents, which is what Super Buu ended up being, only for Krillin to be killed off screen by the latter in the manga later in the same arc. So its length and that it seemingly doesn't serve any purpose to the larger narrative of the Buu Saga is what places it down here. Number 9, Krillin and Android 18 versus Majora. At the start of the Tournament of Power, of which both Krillin and Android 18 represent the Universe 7 team, they are confronted by Universe 4's Majora, who is blind. After the two are attacked, Krillin fights Majora alone and uses the stench of his shoe to throw off Majora before he eliminates him. One of the main points for this fight's inclusion is that it's really the only time in Super prior to the Galactic Patrol Prisoner arc where Krillin fights an antagonist who isn't a Frieza soldier. It also does something that I can't say about Z or GT in having Krillin and 18 fight as a team. I think it's insane that we've seen Goku and Vegeta, who are not married, fight as a pair more times than the only couple in the series that such a thing would make sense to see. This very simple concept really elevates this fight for me upon rewatching it. The reason this fight is near the bottom is very similar to why the Piccolo versus Frost fight was near the end of the top 10 Piccolo fights. It's a battle in Super featuring a character that isn't Goku or Vegeta that I would say is well done in terms of its choreography and the moves used, and is followed up by a plot development that upsets me for, in my view, disrespecting the character. Because Krillin was eliminated right after this by a sneaky, cowardly opponent in Frost, it's hard for me to not be annoyed when reaching this fight's conclusion. It's like having Vegeta defeat Toppo, and then having him get punched in the back of the head by Jiren. Number 8, Krillin and Gohan versus Captain Ginyu. When Captain Ginyu becomes aware of how much stronger Goku is than him, he decides to switch bodies with him. Gohan quickly recognizes Ginyu as not being his father and joins Krillin and Goku, who's in Ginyu's body, and fighting him. I enjoyed this fight for offering a moral conflict where usually opponents of Goku are enemies or people who are antagonistic to him. In this fight, his body is forced to battle his best friend and son, who, by virtue of their relationships with Goku, have a hard time striking him in a serious manner in the same way they would other threats. And since Krillin is the adult between him and Gohan, it makes sense for him to have an easier time adapting to this dilemma. It's a nice highlight of Captain Ginyu's powers affecting the story in a natural way, and a focus on the friendships Krillin has with both Gohan and Goku, which isn't really spotlighted again until Frieza shows up. It's pretty much the sole time Gohan and Krillin fight a member of the Ginyu Force and don't seem to have trouble handling their opponent without someone intervening, which was the case when they fought Goldo and Raccoon. The only reason this fight is down here is because there are other battles in this series that are more focused on Krillin as a fighter and strategist. Number 7, Krillin versus Vegeta, Nappa, and Cyberman. After Yamcha is killed by the self-destruction of a Cyberman, Krillin comes over to him and mourns his passing before unleashing a scattering bullet that kills every single Cyberman except one, which is later killed by Piccolo, and initially is believed to have murdered Nappa and Vegeta as well. The title of this entry might be misleading because Vegeta and Nappa don't actually fight Krillin during this, but since his attack was aimed at them, then he considered himself fighting them as well. I like this fight because it's a precursor of sorts to Goku's first Super Saiyan transformation, where a character reacts to another character dying with rage that seemingly propels them to be more useful on the battlefield. It's very cathartic to see the Cybermen all get murdered for doing something so vile to one of the Z fighters, as Yamcha is a fairly likable character. It also illustrates the relationship between Krillin and Yamcha, which is one of the longest friendships in the entire series, and one that seemingly becomes deeper over the course of the year gap between the arrival of Raditz and the arrival of Nappa and Vegeta as they spend months training together. The reason it's down here is because ultimately the Cybermen are the least important antagonists throughout the entirety of the Saiyan saga, and the attack only succeeds in getting rid of them. If Krillin had actually killed Vegeta and Nappa, or at least Nappa, I probably would have this in the top 3, if not number 1, because it would have been a shocking ending to an arc that still felt earned because he had trained seemingly just as hard as the other characters. I still like the conclusion to the arc that we got, which showed that the protagonist shouldn't always rely on Goku to save the day, but this other scenario would have been nice. Number 6, Krillin, Piccolo, and Gohan versus Garlic Jr. After Gohan kills Spice and Vinegar, Garlic Jr.'s henchman, Garlic Jr. reopens the Dead Zone after becoming upset he could not make Earthlings his mind-controlled slaves. Krillin and Piccolo fly up to Garlic Jr. to distract him as Gohan fires a Maseko at the Makio star that destroys it and propels Garlic Jr. to fall into the Dead Zone again. I am a fan of the Garlic Jr. arc, and a main selling point of it for me is having a villain who is intimidating and keeps progressing in terms of power in a similar way to Frieza, but who can be defeated without the other characters having to rely on Goku. I like that this fight acts as a sequel of sorts to the Dead Zone film, with the exception of not having Goku, and it also foreshadows Gohan eventually being the one to defeat the main villain of the following arc. Gohan's concern for Krillin before the latter flies away and their reunion where they embrace after Garlic Jr.'s defeat are small moments of sentimental attachment that I haven't seen in much of the subsequent canon material. The only reason it's further down here is due to it being filler, and thus the higher ranking fights all having more importance in either Krillin's story or the overall plot. Number 5, Krillin versus Xiaozu. During the 22nd World's Martial Arts Tournament, Krillin is matched against Xiaozu after the latter rigged the match placements. He is initially repelled by Xiaozu's telepathic powers, but manages to defeat him by yelling math problems that Xiaozu has trouble solving without counting his fingers, and thus distracts him. A main point of praise for this fight is that it's really the only time Xiaozu as a character is focused on his own right. Even though he has a leading role in the beginning of the King Piccolo saga, the bulk of characterization goes to Tien, and his role in the latter part of that arc and subsequent arcs is either to motivate Tien or act as an accessory to him. This is, as far as I'm aware, the only time Krillin fights an opponent with telepathic abilities before Goldo on Namek, and it's always an interesting display because telepathic powers require the user to think, and since Krillin is a strategist, it makes him and his opponents foils of each other. The only point against it for me is that Xiaozu isn't as important of a character, in my opinion, as the higher-up opponents that Krillin fights. Number 4, Krillin versus Piccolo. In the first match of the finals at the 23rd World's Martial Arts Tournament, Piccolo is pitted against Krillin, who he manages to defeat by surprising him with a strike to the top of the head that sends Krillin crashing down to the tournament ring. Although Krillin initially recovers, which startles the confident Piccolo, he later concedes the match. This fight was also featured in my top 10 Piccolo fights video. One of the main appeals of this fight is that it sets up Piccolo's strength without diminishing Krillin as a character. Oftentimes when an antagonist is introduced and the writers want to illustrate their power, they have the antagonist defeat some pre-existing protagonist with ease. Instead of that, Toriyama shows off the fruits of Krillin's training by having him fly for the first time. He's also able to harm Piccolo multiple times and even surprises the latter toward the end with how much abuse he can take. It's a nice balance between making Piccolo seem powerful but not so invincible that he can just destroy everyone else with one blow, which is what happened with future antagonists such as Frieza, Cell, and Buu. This fight does get overshadowed by others in the same arc, as I've often said that I consider Goku versus Piccolo to be the best fight in the series. Number 3, Krillin versus second form Frieza. During Frieza's fight against Gohan, Vegeta, and Krillin, Frieza mortally wounds Krillin by stabbing him through the chest with the horns on his head. After being healed by Dende, Krillin rejoins the battle by cutting off Frieza's tail, which results in Frieza giving chase to Krillin before the latter uses his solar flare to bind Frieza long enough to slip away. I mentioned during my top 10 Vegeta fights video that one of the reasons I liked the second Vegeta versus Zarbon fight was that it was a chance for Vegeta to come back and defeat a villain who had previously defeated him. This wasn't the case for Krillin versus second form Frieza, but allowing Krillin to return to the fight after being mortally wounded by Frieza and get the jump on him twice was a respectable treatment of his character. It's also the last time we get to see Krillin have a fight with the main villain of a saga, as his fight with first form Cell is filler, and Perfect Cell one-shotting him doesn't count as a fight to me. The only reason it's held back is because it's part of a larger continuous skirmish with Frieza that consists of Gohan, Goku, Vegeta, and Piccolo also fighting Frieza at various points. So it's less centered on Krillin as opposed to other entries on this list. Number 2, Krillin, Gohan, and Piccolo versus Nappa. After Tien's left arm was ripped off and Xiaozu sacrificed himself, Piccolo and Krillin attack Nappa before giving Gohan a chance to strike. Gohan runs away instead in fear, and the three interchange in attacking Nappa until Piccolo is killed and Goku arrives. This is the first time we see Piccolo and Krillin fight together, which is one of the more common alliances of protagonists on Goku and Vegeta, and I enjoy the banter between the two and how they serve as foils to each other. I always assessed Toriyama as leaving Krillin as the only human alive by the end of the fight as being a spotlight on him and a courtesy to the character after having him be the first major character to die in the previous series. It's only lower than the first one because I don't view it as being that monumental to Krillin's character, but more so a nice spotlight that, as the series relies more and more on Goku and Vegeta, retroactively becomes more refreshing. Number 1, Krillin versus Goku. In the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai, Krillin and Goku advance to the semifinals for what is to be their only fight during any of the 3 tournaments before Z. This fight was featured in my top 10 Goku fights video. I mentioned that one of the appeals of this fight was that it showed Krillin's ingenuity, such as him using his bald head to blind Goku, inhaling air to keep his balance before landing on the ground, and firing a Kamehameha wave to distract Goku while using his tail. Whenever I watch this fight, it reminds me of why Krillin is one of my 3 favorite characters in Dragon Ball, because him being weaker than most of his opponents allows for the writers, be they Toriyama or Toritaro, to have to be more creative with the choreography of a fight as opposed to the usual whoever is stronger automatically wins mentality of the latter parts of the series. The fight retroactively depresses me a bit because it harkens back to a period where anyone could win a tournament or a battle no matter what race they were, that you didn't have to transform or have your hair turn a different color to get the better of your opponent. The only negatives of this fight are that it's the last time we get to see Krillin fight before his first death. That takes him effectively out of the story for an arc. I would have liked his last fight to be maybe against someone that he could be allowed to defeat, but that's less a problem of the fight and more a gripe of the overall story of the series that I have. Thanks for watching, and my next Dragon Ball video will be me reviewing the Moro arc.